The topic of our next session is barriers to parish health, causes and symptoms. Now, one of the first things I did when I got to St. Spiridon was I went out and I purchased 100 Bibles. And I stuck them in the chairs in the church. As I said, St. Spiridon is the first Orthodox church in the history of the world in Loveland, Colorado. And I realized that if someone was to walk in, they'd probably experience something they had never experienced before. So I figured if I put a Bible in front of them, it would be kind of like a pacifier. It would kind of calm them down. I mean, one guy asked me, he's like, why do you always shake that smoke? Another thing that I did is I walked into the narthex, our quote-unquote narthex, and I shoved the candle stand against the wall. So I had an usher that first Sunday say to me, hey, Father, where am I supposed to stand? And I said, look, when you stand behind that counter, it looks like it's a transaction counter, like you're going to do business. And people who walk in don't know what it is. I want you to stand in front and say hello to people. Now, those are simple things, and there's a brochure at the back of your resource packet that tells you about some of the other things that we started to do. But right now, what I want you to do is I want you to start to focus on health by first asking, what are the barriers to it? In other words, what things might your parish be doing that inhibit health? When I was in business school in the 80s, I remember a case study on McDonald's and their management training. In their corporate stores, they moved trainees every 6 months. Why, we wondered. And the answer was simple. They knew that a new manager in a new location would see things that an established manager couldn't. So barrier breaking, as we go into this topic, is about vision. It's about seeing things as you've never seen them before. It is like the transition that the blind man makes in John chapter 9. And barrier breaking as a topic itself is so important that I wrote an article for it. And it's also in your packets. It'll be in the next Praxis magazine. So what are the barriers that stand in our way of parish health? Now I'm going to cover 4. You can see them up there: imbalance, stagnation, blind spotting, autocracy. And in these 4, I think I cover about 90% of the barriers that you're going to find. Now please, not all these ideas are mine. I've distilled them. But if you read your own survey results, you're going to find that when you answered question 30, what challenges do we face? You're going to find these barriers. For each, I'm going to define what it is. Then I'm going to give you a picture of it, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. Then I'm going to talk about the causes, what causes this barrier to arise. And then I'm going to show you a slide on symptoms. Now, the symptom slide is important because sometimes you can't figure out the cause, but you have the symptom. And so you can work your way backwards. So let's talk about barrier building. Parishes, unhealthy parishes, easily become busy building barriers, especially when they become interested in defending a specific identity, especially the one that does not envision the essentials of church, but the specifics. Let me tell you a parable that'll illustrate my point. On a dangerous sea coast where shipwrecks often occurred, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat. But the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, and with no thought for themselves, they went out day or night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little station, so it became famous. Some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding areas wanted to become associated with the station and give of their time and money and effort for the support of its work. New boats were bought, new crews were trained, and the little life-saving station grew. Some of the new members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and so poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in and enlarged the building. Sound familiar? Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they redecorated it beautifully and furnished it as sort of a club. Less of the members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do the work. The mission of life-saving was still given lip service, but most were too busy or lacked the necessary commitment to take part in the life-saving activities personally. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick. Some of them had black skin. And some spoke a funny language, and the beautiful new club was considerably messed up. So the property committee immediately had a shower house built on the outside, where victims of shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. In the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership because some of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal life and pattern of the club. But some members insisted that life-saving was their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were voted down and told that if they wanted to save lives of the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, they could go begin their own life-saving station somewhere else. And so they did. Now, as the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes, unfortunately, that occurred in the old. They evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. And if you visit the seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are still frequent in those waters. Only now most of the people drown. To give you another illustration of what I mean, I want you to imagine an upside-down funnel. An upside-down funnel is flipped so that the narrow opening is on top and the larger one on the bottom. And the result, obviously, is that we limit what can enter. Barrier-building parishes do this. They become upside-down funnels. In the mode of barrier building, the parish creates a culture and then seeks to defend a culture that maintains its narrow openings and its high walls. And here is the key. Barrier building, in almost 99% of the cases where it's found, is the result of a misguided focus on a limited identity. Now, obviously, identity is important, but knowing what makes us who we are is the key. And barrier-building parishes have got it wrong. They have focused on the wrong identity. In a parish like this, our true values are compromised, and we cave to special interests. In this type of parish, parishioners operate out of the understanding that new members need to look and act a certain way to gain entrance into the church. And outsiders quickly get the message that they need to become something they're not. In the end, with the funnel in the upside-down position, the narrow opening at the top, then anything that enters exits in chaos. For example, children of parishes like these cannot name the 4 Gospels, but they have developed other skills. The parish whose funnel is upside down, instead of funneling things from larger openings into the main channel towards Christ, do the opposite. And it's awful, of course, because barrier building means we don't build bridges to people. We don't want them to be part of us. We lose sight of our true purpose. And the good news is no longer central to our vision and mission, to our culture. We busy ourselves looking for people like us, even for heretics, but not converts. And sadly, when you are in a barrier-building parish, you grow smaller and smaller over time, and you have stunted vitality and growth to show for it. Now, obviously, the opposite is the barrier-breaking parish. A parish that busies themselves with breaking down barriers flips the funnel. And it operates like the parable of the dragnet in Matthew 13. It pulls all sorts of people in. A dragnet gathers everything. And when that funnel is flipped, then the parish has removed itself from thinking that a specific identity or a specific set of ideas will cause growth. Instead, they understand that you have to remove the obstacles. So when I started to internalize this idea, ideas exploded in my head. Let me give you an example. We hold the Saturday of Souls liturgies like you do. But after the liturgy, we stop, we all go into the gym, and we make the Koliva together, and then we go back in. Why? Because I figured most of the people in Loveland have never made Koliva. So let's learn to make it together. Let's explain what the prayers are, and go back in. We have a service book for every service, and it's switched out before every service. If the verses change, we change the page. The hymns, we tab them, we tell people where we're at. Even for pre-sanctified liturgy, for Vespers, everything. We broadcast our liturgies live. The bottom line in it. You like that phrase? The bottom line in it. I have an old Greek in my parish, and he always says, papuli, the bottom line in it. It is the leaders that make barrier breaking possible. We're the ones who change the culture of exclusion. And in its place, we create a healthy parish culture that is welcoming to all. Now, it would be impossible and not very useful if I gave you every barrier there is, if I explained all of them, and it's sort of like giving you a map that shows you every tree and ditch and gully. So instead of giving you something totally specific, I'm going to try to pull our focus back a little bit, and then you're going to go do the hard work in your parishes with your other co-leaders of figuring out what your parishes are. So I want to familiarize you with these barriers. Now, first, I want you to give you an image. And the image I want to give you is something positive. Pruning. Everyone knows, as I've said already, that exercise alone cannot overcome an unhealthy behavior. Another way of understanding this is some losses are gains. Remember what Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, so that it might bear more fruit. The demon-possessed man is dispossessed in order that he might be filled with something. We fast so that we too might be filled with something healthy. When I was a kid, I grew roses with my mom. It was one of the things that we used to do. And I used to hate to cut off blooms from a rose bush that were just past their prime. It just pained me to do it. And my mom kept telling me, son, trust me, when you prune the bush, you'll get more buds. With careful pruning, you're going to find that vitality and sustained growth becomes the norm. So, on to the 4 types. The first one, imbalance. Now, imbalance comes from the handling of the tension between hospitality and identity wrongly. And the image that you see is a mouse holding up an elephant. So something small or insignificant outweighs the big and important thing. None of us here would say that philoxenia, or hospitality, is not something we don't want to offer. But just like a child that comes into a new family, or I should say it the other way, a new child into the family, hospitality changes the identity of our parish. It's my educated opinion that 80% or more of our unhealthy behaviors are a result of this barrier. Barrier breaking is going to lead to health. It's going to lead to growth. So that happened at St. Spiridon's. And new ideas started to surface. So when we started moving forward, one of the founders, one of the 6 founding families, one of their family members who was on the parish council came to me and said, Father, now I know that I said to you when you got here I wanted to grow, but I'm not sure where we're going. What do you mean, I said? Well, growth is good, but listen to what he said. But I thought we would grow with different types of people than we're getting. You see, in an imbalanced parish, we focus on the specifics of our identity instead of the essentials. We kind of have a preconceived notion of who can join. And we defend and promote this false identity among our members. Now, additionally, as leaders of these communities, we fail to see the shift. We don't see that our people are focusing on specifics instead of essentials. Do you remember the movie Miracle? So it's that movie about the U.S. hockey team in the 1980s, right? That won the gold medal. And there's a rather moving scene. They're in a warm-up match before going to the Olympics. And they've played rather uninspiring hockey. And their coach, Herb Brooks, after the scrimmage, has them line up and do suicides. Do you guys remember the scene? Again and again, he asks the members of the team, who do you play for? And for hours on end, they demonstrate that they're focusing on the specifics of their identity. One says, I play for Boston University, coach. I play for Minnesota, coach. I play for Wisconsin. And finally, Mike Eruzione, who would go on to captain the team and score one of the most memorable goals in Olympic history, answers, Coach, I play for the US of A. He identifies the essential. And Herb stops the suicides. You know, the same problem is found in the book of the Apostles. It's also found in the book of the Galatians, right? There's a famous passage in Galatians 2 where St. Paul admonishes St. Peter. Because St. Peter had first welcomed all people, only to be persuaded by fear to withdraw himself from their company. In verse 14, Paul says, but when I saw they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in the presence of all, if you, being a Jew, live like the Gentiles and not like the Jews, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? Just as back then, so also today, focusing on specifics instead of essentials happens because we create a culture of defending and promoting a false identity. We've become focused on the unimportant and lose sight of the valuable. It happens because our leadership has forgotten its role of shepherding the people towards the truth. That's why we pray for a bishop. That's why we pray for our priests. So how important then is it that our leaders recognize and distinguish the essentials from the specifics? It's crucial. Now, symptoms, look at these. If you're imbalanced, then evangelism vanishes. Newcomers remain visitors. They don't stay. Details replace essentials. You prioritize small rocks instead of big rocks. We start with our differences. We begin conversations with how you're different than us. We become irrelevant. And here's the big one. And finally, and most importantly, we create a false identity that becomes an idol and virtually untouchable. Stagnation. This type of barrier leads to a parish that has an inward focus. It thinks of serving itself first, and the image I have for this is obviously a pool of stagnant water. Nothing new comes in. It thinks of serving itself first, right? So what's the cause? The hallmark of this parish is a lack of demographic and idea diversity. Instead, what we find is a single dominant culture. It can be a single dominant race or ethnicity, socioeconomic class, political ideology, or even an idea bias. Remember that large parish in Louisiana? When he got there, he had to explain to his Baptist parish that you didn't have to be a Republican to be a Baptist. They were shocked. About 6 years into St. Spiridon's, I was down at the cathedral in Denver, and one of the yayas that helped raise me came up to me and says, Father, I never see you anymore. Where are you? And I said, I'm in Loveland. Oh, Loveland. We have church, Loveland. I said, yeah, we have a growing church. A lot of Greeks there? I said, no, not any Greeks up there. She says, tell the bishop to close it. You see, stagnation is a focus on the causes and interests of a few. And so the parish results become self-absorbed. It's about serving ourselves. even worship, ministries. They're all about eternal consumption. We do a lot of things that are social in nature. But notice that Christ's miracles don't just affect the person that he heals, they affect the community outside. Symptoms. In a stagnating parish, we get delusional. We start to think there are only red jelly beans in the world. There are no other kinds of jelly beans. We shrink over time. And those of us who remain become disfigured. Successive generations of our kind leave the church. And we do not impact the community around us. We become insulated and parochial. We don't notice the world around us. We can't understand its interests, its needs, because only our stuff matters, right? And think about it. If your parish went away, would anyone notice? Blind spotting. Now, I don't want to offend you. You probably see a cartoon I used to like when I was a kid, Mr. Magoo. Remember Mr. Magoo? But humans all have blind spots. And these, in effect, prohibit us from seeing clearly the disconnects and conflicts that are unproductive to parish health. The causes of blind spotting are, and this is the first one, underdeveloped leadership. When I went to St. Spiridon, I was pretty sure that I was a leader. But in retrospect, I realized I wasn't. I was an underdeveloped leader. And when I look back on my earliest decisions, I cringe, as I'm sure I will 5 years from now. Now, another cause for blind spotting is the lack of a clear strategic plan. Or, if you have a vision and mission, you don't have alignment. We fail to get everyone in the same boat and on the same page. And these parishes also tend to have poorly defined organizational structure. They lack clarity over roles and responsibilities. They cannot execute and implement. And they demonstrate over and again technical incompetence. We don't know what we're doing. Now, the symptoms is that you lose trust. People stop following you. Community won't work towards a common purpose. Nobody's oars go in the water at the same time. Confusion reigns. What's my role? What's my responsibility? Nobody knows. Talent, this is the biggest one. Talent leaves the playing field or sits on the bench. So many of you mentioned that you couldn't attract talent. It might be because of this. We lack focus and we expend precious resources on non-essential tasks. Decisions are warehoused and nothing happens. Okay, our last barrier. We're going to wrap up here and then we're going to break out into our groups. Autocracy. Let us say that having a hierarch in the room is a good thing. I know autocratic is the word, but I'm going to use autocracy. I actually looked it up. You can use this word. Being in a parish with a parish priest or a council does not mean that we govern in an autocratic or dictatorial way. Yet in the autocratic parish, sharing power and decision-making is difficult, if not impossible. In myself, I constantly find that I have a desire to grab a hold of everything, but that comes from fear. So when a parish suffers from this type of barrier, it tends to be led from the top down. And this is rather brittle. You know, historians say that one of the key reasons the Americans were able to defeat the German army and the Japanese was that Americans tended to spread decision-making amongst the grunts. But autocracy parishes rely on rules, regulations, fear, and compliance. Tragically, the parish lacks an empowered parishioner base. It doesn't have shared engagement from its members. And so the image I have is Stalin. Now, it should be obvious what the causes are. Decisions and power are held in the hands of the few. Now, in an earlier presentation, you can look on YouTube. I did one in Portland, and I talk a lot about this. One of those models is called a daddy model parish. You know, what does Father say? Did Father approve this? Will Father be at the meeting? Or chapel model parishes. What do the original members think? What does the so-and-so family believe? This whole structure arises from a belief that the priest and leader knows what to do, and we can't trust the masses. And so in these parishes, we don't collaborate or listen, which is co-laboring. And the social fabric of the parish is weak and interconnected. Now, almost all of you, when you mentioned challenges, you said basically the top one, apathy, disengagement. Parishioners in an autocratic parish become consumers of holy things. They're renters, not owners. They'll walk by trash in a hallway. They lack passion or spirit. The parish is listless. Things are met with indifference. No one cares. There's anger and whispering, gossiping and mistrust, lack of creativity. Initiative and involvement and risk-taking does not exist because there is a fear of failure. We're just going to do what we've always done. There's cliques and power groups and tasks are left undone. You can walk into that parish and the coat closet is dirty and cluttered. There's something that needs to be done, but it's always someone else's job. There's no rhythm or cadence to parish life. Leaders don't listen. And this is the killer. You have uneven performance over time. And so ever slowly, this type of barrier takes the parish apart. It's destructive and insidious. Now, I am not a negative guy, and so that's the last of this stuff. From here forward, we're going to talk about, it's like baptism. You spend like 15 minutes in the back doing the prayers of exorcism, then you turn towards the altar and you start, just embracing Christ. So we're going to do that next.